This is a follow-up to the week's dealings with something of race, and I just wanted to look at one more thing. So sometimes I like to use films, obviously, but another thing that I can use, I don't have my microphone very close. There you go. Now it's closer. Now you can probably hear me better. But another thing that I like to use a lot for these is just looking at Game of Thrones, because it was a show that I loved. Obviously, I have to be very selective with what I can play here for those of you that know Game of Thrones. But this particular scene is one that a lot of people kind of criticized uh, for sort of the imagery of this. And I'm going to just give you sort of the background of this, but this is in the middle of the last season. It's the Battle of Winterfell. I was about to say the wrong thing there. Um, and the very beginning of the battle, there's sort of three giant forces that are on the good guys' side. They're basically fighting sort of this rush of sort of like ice zombies, for lack of a better word. Um, Obviously, that's simplifying things for those of you that know the show, but it's good enough for our purposes now. So, ice zombies coming to kill everyone. They have an overwhelming advantage just in numbers because they can raise anyone who's dead to be one of their ice zombies. And the next part then is, of course, that we've got the forces of the living. Forces of the living are armies that follow a character by the name of Jon Snow, which are mostly the people of Westeros, which are mostly white noblemen and their soldiers that go with them. Actually, I guess there's four groups. There's the wildlings that are people that used to live in this area where the ice zombies are, and they've come south to try to be safe, but now they're not safe anymore. But they're fighting for the living. They're also generally depicted as white. And then there is another character by the name of Daenerys Targaryen, who was basically trying to become the queen of the world. And she has two armies that fight for her called the Unsullied. That, for lack of a better way of perfectly kind of lining these up, they kind of seem like to me to be sort of Northern African in their skin tone and just the way that culturally the way they act, at least from what I understand. I may be way off on that. And then lastly, there's a group called the Dothraki, which they are again also a minority group as far as when we talk about a racial minority compared to being white. They're non-white. But the other thing is that they kind of fight along the lines of maybe some of the barbarian tribes that sacked the Roman Empire, or maybe the Mongols. So they're definitely seen as sort of a minority group, at least for the audience watching this on HBO a few years ago. And I'm just going to play on this. Basically, we have this scene here. In this scene, this is the group of Dothraki charging into battle. And there is a zombie army coming. They're coming somehow with fire by magic. And they actually they're basically charging into battle, trying to take the fight to the ice. It's great cinematography here. It's a good shots. It's high shot coming down on them. Some of these shots are sure hard to see. Some John and Darian. They're gonna love to see the stuff ahead of people and music and everything. Just and they hit the other army, the army of the dead. And you just watch all those flaming swords go out to where there used to be so many dots out there, and now you can still see some, but you see fewer and fewer as all those little dots get extinguished. And this is a show that's had some issues with how they've talked about with basically people have had issues with how they've been treated, and at this point now, of course, every one of those fires has been extinguished. So the Dothraki have been slaughtered. they were sent to their own slaughter. And this is a show that had issues with this because there's one other famous scene. Let me actually see if I can find it. I didn't think to look for this earlier. Bring this off for just a second. I've got my white man's burden thing from our previous one, but um, the other one that I'm going to look for, it's basically a moment with Daenerys when she first gets the Unsullied. And this is another one that I believe this is it. So, oops, there it goes. And this is the end of another famous scene. Actually, I'm gonna have to jump way ahead, but basically, she's liberating this this city. And when she goes through, she's going through, and you see the very white, very very blonde Daenerys Targaryen going through. At the end, she is their white savior to the point that they literally hoist her up, and we see the white savior being lifted up in this sea of mostly minority figures. And just the symbolism here of the white savior along with the previous stuff, wiping out the Dothraki. These are things that some people thought were pretty culturally insensitive. So this is the type of stuff that, this is the way that people look at this stuff. Is it fair? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Like I said, there can be stories that deal with the hardships of slavery. There should be stories that deal with the hardships of slavery. There should be stories that deal with the hardships of segregation. There should be stories about evil colonialists. That shouldn't be the only stories that are told for Native Americans, for instance. That shouldn't be the only stories told for people of African American descent. That when that's the only stories we hear from them, then that's the only thing we think of them. That we see African Americans as just victims of this horrible system, or people that want to be depicted as victims, so that it colors the way that we look at them when an issue comes up. That's the same type of sort of racist attitude that people bring up when they claim that black people are just looking for handouts or stuff like that. That it comes from this setup of, oh, they're just always the victims, and it comes from sometimes our cinema reflects what happens in our society, and our society reflects what happens in cinema, but it also changes our attitudes in large part. That film and television and books and all of this have a very powerful they're a very powerful educational tool, and they can change the way we look at things. So yeah, that's the other thing I just wanted to kind of hit, was just to kind of give you an example here of a way to look at this stuff. So with that, again, this one's kind of an optional video. If you feel like you got without this, then I will put in the notes that you didn't necessarily have to watch this. But that's now all. So I hope that you all do well with this, and certainly any questions, please let me know, and I'll answer them as best as I can, or I will find answers for you if I don't have them.